are listening to the Moody Girl podcast with me, Emily Fazer. I'll be opening the minds of experts, enthusiasts, and storytellers, discovering their secrets on health and how to make the most out of life. So, hi, Tasha. Thank you so much for being on the Moody Girl podcast with me today. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like the sun is shining a little bit today, but not too much. No, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling very I've got quite a to-do list, but I'm feeling quite hopeful about it today.
That's a good way to be, absolutely.
How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm all good. I mean, I'm in Suffolk, so an hour outside London, and it's definitely not sunny here. So I'm wishing that I'm in London right now.
I
Uh,
hope the sun will come your way.
Yeah, exactly. Push it this way, please. So for anyone that doesn't know you, I came across your work through TikTok, through Instagram. Your social media presence is really evident. It's really strong, and you've got such a positive message with your work, which I think shines through for so many people. So yeah, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know of your work, can you give us a little bit of an understanding on what you do?
Okay. So I'm Tasha, also known as Real Talk Therapist on all social platforms. And I'm a qualified psychotherapist. And I love what I do, but I also am very aware that a lot of people can't afford therapy or can't get the therapist that they need. So for the last 3 years, I've had my Real Talk Therapist platform on Instagram and TikTok, which it's giving people the tools that they need to maybe start doing the work for themselves and recognizing, I guess, some of the kind of ways that they need to do some healing work or self-love work or understanding where trauma has showed up in their lives, but in a really, mental health can be quite scary to talk about sometimes, but I'm all about kind of finding ways to talk about it that's kind of light and accessible and real and authentic and maybe a little bit joyful and hopeful. I want it to be compassionate and hopeful. So that's kind of where Real Talk Therapist has been born. And it's kind of spread into different things like talks and books and stuff like that. So yes, that's
Amazing. I think that's I was going to ask you that question anyway, because I've spoken to a lot of different people on the shows, and I've spoken to therapists as well. And that's always something that I think about is, with the current situation that we all seem to find ourselves in with, costs of fuel, cost of living, all of it. It's so expensive, that it seems like we're all just trying to tread water and get by at the moment. So sometimes therapy, something such as therapy, can seem like such a luxury. And people really need it. It's something that we really need as human beings, and to process traumas and past experiences. So I think the fact that you are opening that into social media is such an important part of that. And I mean, even with friends recently who've gone through really nasty breakups and haven't quite found the right therapist, number one, because I know it's like a bit like dating to find your therapist. You got to have like that mutual understanding. But they've found a lot of solace in social media platforms and listening to podcasts and TikTok and Instagram. So I think that is such an important message for any listeners out there. If you are feeling like you need to do the work or you want to do the work, then Tasha's out there on social media giving you some of those tools. So thank you for that. So you mentioned your book, and I can see that it's available to pre-order right now. It's called Real Talk, out in September. What can we expect from this new release from you?
So it is a book full of kind of therapy lessons to kind of help you on the journey of like self-love and healing. So I unpack a lot of things that you would unpack in a therapy session with a therapist. It's things like, starting to look at your childhood, and if you have what we call mommy and daddy issues, your attachment, body image, sex, identity, race. Like it's kind of like this kind of introduction into unpacking those things for yourself. And there's lots of creative exercises, so it's not just like reading a heavy text, like it's actually very lightly written, but there's lots of great exercises for you to do some deeper work within yourself as well, and lots of tools and tips. So it's kind of like, yeah, if you're in the, I mean, wherever you are in your healing stage, like it's kind of giving you the tools to kind of go into the next step of that.
Absolutely. I think that sounds incredible. And for anyone listening who thinks that might be useful for them, I'm going to make sure that I put all of the pre-order links in the show so you can get those straight after. Yeah, I think I've been reading a few books recently which have had those exercises in them. And, just taking it chapter by chapter and doing those exercises rather than just kind of reading it cover to cover has been really cathartic, actually, and it's helped me to kind of address certain areas that maybe I didn't know needed addressing. And kind of on the discussion of inner child work, that's definitely something I've been looking into myself. And yeah, I guess releasing some things that I didn't even realize needed to be released. And so for anyone, I guess, who is in adulthood now and things are showing up for them, and that might be anger, that might be frustration, that might be anxiety, do you think these are stemming from past traumas, or does it all go back to our inner child essentially?
I would say maybe not always, but there does tend to be some kind of road that leads back to our past. So even things like if you're at work and there's someone that really irritates you and you can't figure out why this person irritates you so much, it's usually because there's something about that person that either reminds you of a part of yourself that you don't like,
Mm,
or you've been told not to be, or they remind you of someone or something from your past. So
mhm,
there's always this kind of like shadow dynamic happening with everything that we do. Yes, you might be frustrated with them because they took your stapler. That's valid as well. But there's also probably a shadow dynamic also happening that we need to look at and understand. And the reason why we need to look at that and understand that is because then we can unpack it. And even though it will still be annoying that they take your stapler, it won't be as intense.
mm,
So it is really important to kind of find where does the feeling start? Where did it start from?
mhm,
Same thing with like dating and stuff. We can find ourselves dating the same people with the same issues coming up because our brain finds it really familiar to be with those people. Maybe they're emotionally unavailable, and maybe we had emotionally unavailable parents. So it's actually very familiar for us to then be in that role of being with an emotionally unavailable person.
mhm.
It's not always conscious. But I think the more work that we do, the more conscious this stuff becomes, and the more we can start to break out of those patterns.
Yeah, I see that absolutely. And like, even if I relate it to my own life, my friends' lives, you without realizing it, sometimes, I'm a millennial and 33, and I very much look back on my life and see patterns. And
Mm.
it's only now when I'm starting to really address those and really delve deep into why I might feel such an extreme pang of anger when someone takes my stapler, for instance. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, where is that coming from? So you mentioned shadow dynamic. What is that? I'm not aware of what that is.
So the shadow dynamic is, if you imagine like the way that you've grown up, there will always be things that people told you not to be. So they might say, don't be so loud, or don't be so chatty in class, or um, even things like don't wear colorful. There'll be loads of things that people will try to kind of project onto you and put expectations onto you. And all of those things we will basically like put into our shadow. So our shadow is kind of like this cupboard that we put all this stuff in. Okay, I'm not allowed to be too loud. Let me put that in the cupboard and I'll just make myself small. I'm not allowed to be too show too much skin. Let me put that in the cupboard and then wear jumpers all day. It's all the things that we're not allowed to be. We lock into this cupboard. But it's not like those things go away. They actually still exist somewhere in our minds, and they will come out in ways when we don't have our ego don't have control over them. So
Mm,
when we find someone who takes our stapler and they're very loud in the office, they're going to irritate us because they can be how we're not allowed to be. They've got the
mm,
permission to be loud. We don't have the permission to be loud, and so there's this envy and jealousy. Or it might be that we are, when we're drinking or when we're really tired, we're more likely to be loud because we can't control it now. So there's little ways that our shadow will kind of seep out. And I think, you know, our shadow should exist. We should actually embrace our shadow. We should allow ourselves to be loud and be all the things that people tell us not to be, like, at least to some degree, because it's a part of who we are. We can't just choose what parts of our personality can exist and can't exist. So, our shadow, if we don't embrace it, it will control us.
Absolutely. Wow, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people will identify with that, you know, in terms of, I think I've spoken about this quite often on the show, even school, for instance, you know, just like having that environment where you have to put your hand up to go to the toilet and you can't listen to your intuitions. And that's just kind of how we have been bred in society to live. So yeah, that's really interesting and something I'm going to look into more. So is this, I know you've written your book, how have you found the whole process, you know, in terms of writing that? And it's a huge thing, and I'm sure so many people would dream of doing something like that. So can you talk us through how you found that?
Um, I would say it's not as dreamy as I thought it would be. I pictured it to be like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to be like in a cabin somewhere and like with the view of the sea and just like writing like my best life. And it was absolutely nothing like that. It was actually many days of me on the sofa being like, oh my God, I can't do this. This is just too much. How the hell am I going to write 80,000 words? Like, just let me just walk out now. Um, it was really grueling. Like, there's parts that I loved, but there were parts that were really grueling. I told, like, when I got my book deal, they asked me, how long do you want to write the book? And I said 9 months, because I thought, you know, it's like a baby. So like 9 months is like a good time. And I kind of wish I'd asked for more time, actually, because it took me a long time to get started. I'm someone that I ponder over so many ideas all of the time. And it's like, okay, great, that's wonderful, Tasha, but can we put it onto paper? Like, make it happen. And I think an interesting thing is, because obviously I'm online, I'm on social media, and a lot of my content is short captions and reels and stuff. It was really a strange thing to start to do write a whole chapter about a topic that I normally would write in a carousel of like 10 slides. So it was quite an adjustment. There were definitely like parts that I loved. I found myself being like, okay, let me write what younger Tasha needed to read, or let me see this as like a love letter to my clients, or the clients that I no longer see, and they now have this tool that they can use forever. And that really helped to kind of ground me and bring me back to, why am I doing this, and actually I am capable of doing this as well. The thing is, even though it was grueling, I definitely would do it again and again, and I have so many book ideas, so this won't be the first one.
Okay, great. We're all looking forward to reading it, absolutely. So, you know, you've explained a little bit about your work, about your upcoming book that's coming out, but what about your backstory? How did you end up, you know, working as a psychotherapist, training as a psychotherapist? You know, what was your childhood like leading up to this?
So, where do I start? So I would say, when I trained to be a psychotherapist, I was actually the youngest in my class.
Wow.
The youngest in the class. It's a really strange career, because a lot of people, they do it like later on in life, like maybe they were a teacher first, or a nurse, or social worker, and then they're like, oh, actually I want to be a therapist. You know, that their work experience leads them into that path, whereas I knew I wanted to be a therapist from the age of about 15.
Wow.
Which is really, really strangely unusual. um I grew up with mental health in my household from a very young age, so I always observed kind of the extremes of mental health. Um, and that, I think that gave me like this curiosity about, you know, what is mental health? How does it look like? What is the spectrum of mental health? How do I help? Like, I also then was impacted as well as a family member. Um, and I guess from there, I said, actually, I really want to work with helping people talk about mental health. and specifically at the time, I wanted to help children talk about mental health.
Wow.
So when I was 15, and also I watched this film on Nickelodeon called Harriet the Spy.
Oh my God, I love that film. Yes, love that film.
And there's a part when her parents sent her to a child psychotherapist, and he had like all these games and toys in his office. He was a bit of a boring guy, but you know, whatever. And I was like, oh, I want to do that job. And then that's where the journey started. So I obviously went to uni, and then I took on my psychotherapy training to work with children and adolescents, and absolutely loved it. And thought I'm never ever going to work with adults. I don't want to do that. And then I ended up loving working with adults as well. So, you know, I feel like every adult has an inner child, and a lot of us, all our stories start in childhood anyway. That's where we pick up our most difficult patterns, and you know, our learnings about love and how safe we are. Like, that's where we learn all that big stuff. And so it makes sense that, you know, even though I've trained to work with children and adolescents, we all have it in a child and adolescent inside of us anyway. So that's kind of how it started. It was like, I think probably me seeing mental health in my family impacted me, but I didn't have the support that I needed, and my family didn't have the support that they needed. And so it led me into like, I want to support people in some way when this happens.
I mean, that's incredible that you got into it so young, like 15 when you watched that film. It's just insane. Also, one of my all-time favorite films. I can't believe you've mentioned that.
It's such a great film. It's so
So good.
overlooked.
It really is. The soundtrack is fantastic. So I mean, I have to agree as well with what you just said about the fact that everyone, you know, there's so many situations now where I've been working with my inner child, and I see it in conversations with other people now, you know, whether it's family, colleagues, friends, whatever. I'll be like, that's their inner child coming out, you know, and I kind of see it with myself as well. So yeah.
I really love when that happens, you know, when you know, maybe you're having a conflict with somebody, like a parent, for example, or a friend, and then you get a kind of glimpse of what's happening for their inner child. And that can be quite confronting, because it's like, oh crap, like your inner child is hurting, and it gives, I don't know, it gives you like that compassion.
Yes.
When there's conflict, we're thinking about ourselves, but actually it's that compassion of like, oh, my inner child's hurting and their inner child's hurting. Like, how can our inner childs like both get their needs met? Like, what does that look like? I think, I don't know, it's a really beautiful moment when we can do that.
Absolutely. And I think like if you can do that, then yeah, it just alleviates so much conflict rather than seeing us as like completely adult and you're doing that to hurt my feelings and blah 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 blah. Awesome. So I know you talk a lot about self-love, and it's a topic that is very much prominent in, you know, the common in, you know, modern day society now, all about, you know, self-care, self-love. But what would you even describe like proper self-love as?
Mhm. I would call it more of, I think we speak about as like either you have it or you don't. But I don't think it's that easy. I think it's more of a practice. I think we can dip in and out of self-love with ourselves.
Okay.
I think that there are some parts of ourselves that might be easier to love than others. So I would say it's kind of a practice. It's a work. It's something that we have to keep always working on and facing and confronting. It's how we like care for ourselves with compassion and love and kindness, but also how we give ourselves tough love as well, and guidance and boundaries. It's, for me, self-love is a lot about, if I was a parent to myself, how do I give myself that love? How do I teach myself? How do I grow myself? How do I, you know, accept every single part of me, even the parts that I usually don't like? How do I face those bits
Yeah.
without having to cut them off? So yeah.
And for yourself, have you ever, I know obviously you're a therapist, you're fully trained, but do you ever have moments where you need to check in with your own mental health, and your own self-love, and you know, how do you manage that?
Yeah, 100%. Like all all of the time. Like, it doesn't stop even when you're trained. And I think if anything, I have to be even more on top of it. because obviously I absolutely like adore my clients. I look after my like our work together, but I also need to make sure that I'm sound and that I'm grounded as well. Like even on social media as well, like obviously I speak to a lot of people, but one thing that I do on social media is I always do a check-in on my stories. Like a couple of times a week I say, how's everybody feeling, and we do like a little poll. I
Mhm.
always respond to those polls myself as well, so it's
That's
not just
so
my
good.
audience, but it's like I was like, okay, I'm feeling this. Like it's a way of like
Mm.
making sure that we all check in together.
Mhm.
So yeah, like absolutely, like I think, like I said, self-love, you can kind of fall in and out of love with yourself, I think. And so
Mhm.
it's about, when those moments happen for me, finding a way to bring myself back. You know, with the book, there was definitely a lot of moments where I literally fell out of love with myself, of like, oh my God, this is crap. You're crap. You're a crap therapist. You're like, everything is just crap. And then I had to be like, okay, no, let's rein it in. That's a coping mechanism somewhere. So let's bring it back in.
Yeah.
Doing that you actually enjoy and you love and you appreciate about
Mm.
yourself.
Mm.
So
It's
yeah.
funny, isn't it, how sometimes when, we do the things that have always dreamed of doing, but then in those moments we have such resistance. So like self-deprecating thoughts and all of these things come out, and it's so it's almost like you're ambushed. You're like, where the hell is this coming from?
And I think that's the power of fear, isn't it? It's the fear of like, oh my God, what if I get the thing that I actually dreamed of? Or what if I
Yes.
get it and then I fail at it? Or what if
Mm.
people shame me for it? Like there's a fear of like, yeah, how big this thing is,
Mm.
how much we want it for ourselves, but what if it disappoints us in some way?
Absolutely. And I mean, even, lots of discussions I'm having are all about authentic living and trying to get back to our authentic code and authentic personalities and who we once were as children. Um, but also when you really, it's so you're really vulnerable in that way. You kind of strip all those layers back and you're kind of out for the world, and you're like, okay, I'm doing what I'm loving and I'm telling people what I love, but also like, again, what if I fail, or is it going to be embarrassing if it doesn't go right? So, and I think for any listeners at home, if you're experiencing that, if you found something that you're really passionate about and you're putting yourself out there, keep going. There will be, times where you'll have some self-deprecating thoughts, but you can get through them. And I mean, even Tasha, you've got a huge following, you've written an amazing book, and you're a therapist and you have them. So we're all human, we have these thoughts.
Mhm.
um so I wanted to go into a little bit on roles that we have in the family and how those also affect us in adulthood as well, and how we learn to grieve certain situations. So, for instance, I have always been somebody in my family who's very much like the helper. I like to help people and help them to feel better. And, if my sister was ever upset, or, just trying to be a bit of a fixer. Um, and I've been delving more into this kind of concept really, and how it can be quite a lot of a weight to bear sometimes. And the kind of level of expectations that are put on us with these certain roles in the family. So for instance, the eldest male in the family sometimes will be the one who has to, keep everything running a tight ship, and you're the eldest, you need to be sensible, don't cry, all of these things I've been kind of researching and thinking about. And I mean, do you ever have it with any of your clients where that very much is still part of them in adulthood, and that's something they have to work on?
Absolutely. Like I think a lot of these family roles, it's our family is our first experience of relationships, our first experience of like our personality and working out who we are. So those patterns follow us into our friendships, into our workspaces, into our relationships. Um, so for example, like I find it a lot where, kind of similar to what you're saying, the eldest daughter, especially in particular cultures, is like the third parent, or
Mm.
has like these very
Mm.
big parental responsibilities of taking care of everybody and being the one that everyone can lean on, and practically being very providing. Um, and then that will follow them into their friendships, and that will follow them into their relationships, and then they'll follow them into their work, where they're the office mum, or it follows them into certain different ways, and then they still feel that pressure.
Mm.
Like a great example of this is have you watched Encanto? What's it called? Encanto? Is it
Oh
called? Is
yeah,
that
yeah, 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 yeah. I know exactly
yeah.
the one. Yeah.
And there's a sister that's like quite tall and she's strong, and everybody leans on her, like the whole family lean on her, the whole community leans on her. And there's a song where she's just like, oh my gosh, like please send help. I am struggling by having to hold everybody's weight.
Mm.
And that's what happens to a lot of people, that these patterns have kind of followed them through, and eventually at some point it will really, like, they will really struggle with it, because it's been years of having to hold people, but who's holding them?
Mm. Absolutely. And do you think that comes down to boundaries then? So setting boundaries in certain situations and still being able to help in some ways, but also being like, you know what, I've done my piece. They've got their life. I've got my life. I'm going to take a breather, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely like boundaries, but it's also the understanding of, so boundaries are the solution, but before that, I think it's the understanding that I can't be I can't do everything for everyone. It's not my responsibility. It's not who I am as a person. There's more about me as a person than what I can do for other people.
Mhm.
I can just be and be myself and be loved. I don't have to do for everybody to be loved, if that makes sense. So it's
Mhm.
almost breaking down that mentality that I need to be of service and provide to people in order to be loved and lovable.
Mm.
That mentality stops people from setting boundaries to begin with, or even think about, when they think about boundaries, they think of guilt. It goes into the
Mhm.
feeling of guilt.
Mhm.
So we have to kind of break down that cycle first.
Okay, great. I was also going to mention an article that I read that you were featured in. And I mean, everything you kind of read or see on social media is about how we keep ourselves well, wellness tips. And there's so many fads out there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I myself have been through so many fads. I've tried, pretty much open to trying anything to try and feel the best version of myself. Um, what would be your top 5 tips to help keep a check on your mental health and to keep overall well?
Okay, I'm gonna see if I've got like 5 exactly. Um,
Doesn't matter if it's not 5, just your top tips. Let's see that.
okay. Um, my first one will be to get honest, to have the real talk. We do a lot of, hi, like, how are you? I'm fine, or I'm all right, I'm good. Like, these are not feeling words. They're just words of states. They're not actually how you actually feel. So kind of really get comfortable with actually being real with what you're feeling. It might not be with every single person but at least with your close circle of 1 or 2 people, you actually choose a feeling word when people say, how are you? And if,
Mm,
I guess I'll go to the second tip, if you don't know your feeling words, then it's time to learn them. You can literally Google emotion wheel, and you'll get a wheel full of loads of emotions. Um, and also a great book is Brené Brown Atlas of the Heart, which teaches you about the different emotions that we can all have as humans. So really kind of educate yourself on what emotions are, and like practice, checking in with yourself a bit more and learning what is what and what it feels like. When you're sad, what does it feel like? When you're angry, what does it feel like? When you're happy, what does that feel like? It'll feel different to a lot of people, but there'll be certain things that are common. So that's 2. The third thing is, when we're thinking about wellness, I guess, like, yeah, there's so many trends, and they're constantly changing, and they're also a lot about doing. So do meditation, do journaling, do a walk, do this smoothie thing, like detox. There's a lot of doing, but actually just be. Like, we
mm,
need equal time to do things, but also to be. And by that I mean, you need process time. You need time to like sit with your feelings, to sit with yourself, to just, have a conversation with yourself. Allowing space, because it's all great having a full wellness schedule, but if there's no space to actually process what you're feeling, it's actually quite useless.
mm,
I'd say that. And then I'll go with 4. The fourth one, it's just gone out of my mind. Oh, the fourth one is kind of about the body. And this is kind of more about healing. A lot of time when we think about healing or trauma or working on ourselves, we think about the mental process. We think about having the difficult conversations with ourselves or unpacking this or going to therapy and all that stuff. But we have to do it in combination with our body. Otherwise, it still will be work, but it's when you combine it with your body, you're actually, allowing more possibilities for your healing to happen and to grow. So things like, obviously, like yoga and being in nature and just caring for your body, they will kind of teach you what safety is. So trauma is the opposite of safety, if that makes sense. If we've experienced trauma, we've had experience where we didn't feel safe, we didn't feel cared for, we didn't feel protected. And so our body will feel that. But when we're in healing, we're in a place of safety. They're doing things that feel safe, that feel good, that feel affirming for our body and for us, will also help with our healing work, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that really does. I think definitely I've been guilty of doing, putting such a tight regime on wellness in the past. And also, doing a lot of like deep subconscious meditations, like really kind of going back to inner child work. And then wondering why the next week, why I might be a bit ratty, or why it's maybe brought up a little bit of anxiety in the chest, and being like, oh god, it must be me, like. But actually, just even you saying that is really affirmed for me that I need to probably give myself more space after doing something such as subconscious mind work, or really kind of unpacking some stuff. So I've taken a lot from those tips. Thank you. And I hope you as listeners have as well.
And actually, just that reminds me of a fifth one.
Okay, great. Here we go.
You said there about inner child work. So inner child work is also like, there's inner child work, but there's also inner child play. I like to be both.
Okay, great.
So, yes, delve into your childhood and work through all your old patterns and stuff, but also like ask your inner child, what do you want to do today? Like, what would be fun for you? What things you wish you could do when you were a kid that we can do today? Like, what things are you scared of before that we can face? Like, I used to be terrified of roller skating when I was a kid. I just thought, oh my god, like I don't want to fall flat on my bum and be so embarrassed, and I'm never doing that. I was terrified. And then last year I did roller skating classes, and the first thing that happened was I fell on my bum, and it was absolutely okay. And that was so healing for me. So, let there be inner child work, but also inner child play as well.
Love, love, love that. That is the best tip. After this, I think I'm going to ask my inner child what she wants to do today. I'm not going to lie. Oh, thank you. That was really nice to hear. So yeah, something I wanted to touch on there was the language that we're using for ourselves. I think that's so important. The amount of times that we're like, yeah, I'm fine, or like, how are you? Or I'm feeling a bit anxious, or like, are you feeling anxious? Or maybe is it something else? And that's also a really important part of understanding our emotions and understanding how fluid they are, that it's just a moment in time and it will pass. One thing I was going to ask you is, obviously, everyone's talking about, let's try and be happy, and you want to be your best version of yourself and all of that. But what do you think about really sitting in and really feeling sadness, and like being in the I guess the negative emotions per se? Like, do you think it's better to sit with those emotions, or or just suppress them? How what would be your advice surrounding that?
It's always best to not suppress them. Like, anything about that is great. There was something that my clinical supervisor said to me recently. I think she said, people who weren't allowed to be with their feelings end up being scared of them. I think that's what she said. And I think that's what happens when we suppress our feelings. It's like, oh no, I can't be with that, it's too big. Oh no, sadness, like, no, I don't want to be with that. And I can understand the fear. Like, I think that obviously there's like two extremes. There's a suppressing emotions, and then there's being with it to the point where the feeling is so heavy and it overcomes you. And that's what
Mhm.
people are scared of.
Yeah.
So it's about kind of finding that sweet spot in between, which is like, I can sit with my feelings and allow myself to, express something, process something, but I also can go and talk to somebody or ask for help or be with someone that's going to make me feel better than how I feel in this current moment. Um,
Mhm.
I think it's about finding that sweet spot, and the only way to find that sweet spot is to practice kind of going from the two, between the two extremes, and working out what feels right and what doesn't feel right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I was also going to talk to you about, I think on your website I read it, about how you promote self-expression to your clients and how your kind of story stemmed from that, from you doing, was it poetry and art?
Mhm.
So I mean, would you recommend that everyone has a creative outlet?
Absolutely, like, and obviously, like, creative could be anything. It's obviously could be art and poetry, but it could also be, I don't know, painting your kitchen. It's creativity comes in different forms.
Yeah.
Or it could also be, if you don't feel like you're a creative person, I say that in inverted commas, because we all are creative beings. If you feel stuck in that, it could be that you go look for creativity. So you could go to museums or go on a walk or kind of find inspiration.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why I love creativity and self-expression is that our ego gets in the way a lot of the time with our healing. Our ego is a part that says, oh no, I don't want to feel that feeling, that's too big. Or um, I'm being silly for even focusing on this part of my journey, or I'm being silly for feeling this sad or whatever. Like, whereas actually when you're creative, use creativity or expression, it kind of says to your ego, okay, dude, like, step to the side. We're gonna unpack this in a way that is a bit more indirect. We're gonna ease you into this. It's not gonna be too scary, and something might come up that you didn't realize would come up.
Mm.
So I love creativity for that way. It's kind of the playfulness is really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I think I did an episode previously just about kind of tapping into, I don't know, I've been thinking so much, a lot of myself and my friends, especially women, who are surrounded by men with hobbies, and it's like, oh, I don't have a hobby, or because we've spent most of our childhood or adolescence or whatever going to the pub and trying to fit in and blend in or whatever. And now I'm like, oh, now is the time to reconnect with, I guess, as you were saying, rather than the inner child work, the inner child play. And what did we used to enjoy as a child, and can we continue it into adulthood as well?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that I thought that was really cool.
Mhm.
Um, so you've already mentioned about the fact that for anyone who does want to do therapy and they haven't got enough money, the best sort of tools right now would be social media. Would you agree?
I would say social media, but with caution.
Yeah,
Uh,
agreed.
so make sure you're following. I mean, advocates can be great as well, but I think, if you can follow actual mental health experts, qualified people,
Yeah.
resonate with you. Like, not every therapist online is going to resonate. You might see my content and be like, actually, that's not really for me, and that's okay. But find whoever does resonate for you. Um, so I think, yeah, that can be really helpful. And because you'll find things like journal prompts or information or a community that you connect with. So there's that, and also books. I think there's so many great books out there. Obviously like mine, but also there's so many others where they have creative exercises, or yeah, they might just kind of validate your story a little bit, and that might be really helpful.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, those are probably my two, and podcasts as well, like this, are awesome. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I think I feel like it's a positive time in self-development right now, because so many people are opening up those discussions, and whether it's literature, whether it's podcasts, as you say, whether it's social media. I mean, for you, how do you find your kind of boundaries with using social media and protecting your own mental health?
Um, it's interesting. I was asked this question yesterday at a talk, and it's an interesting one because I so as a therapist, I probably share more than what most therapists do, because a lot of therapists are on social media.
Hmm.
But also in general, I probably share more than what would a traditional therapist. Not to say that I bare my soul to my clients, but it's just that I feel personally, how can I expect my client to connect with me if I'm not bringing a little part of myself?
Mm.
And so that's how I am. That's how I show up on social media. So for example, I might, on my stories, I might say, hey guys, I'm going through this experience. And it won't be, the details of my argument with my partner or something, but it'll be like, I'm going through this particular phase in my life and it's a bit stressful. Like the other day I was saying that, the financial stress is really on my mind right now. And is
Yeah.
anybody else feeling that? And that will create a conversation.
Hmm.
I kind of bring a little bit of myself, but then I use it as a talking point for everybody else to bring up what's
Yeah.
good for them. So it's not really about me, but I
Hmm.
am being authentic at the same time.
Yeah.
My boundary, it's like I can share what I want to share, but I don't necessarily want it to be about me. I want it to be a talking point.
Mm.
That, my all my stuff that goes to the people in my circle.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I can navigate that boundary.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy way of approaching it. And also I saw those stories and definitely answered, and it was quite, it was, if I remember correctly, like so many people are feeling that financial stress at the moment.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that a lot as well. Like, people are probably stuck in positions that they really don't want to be in, but they're terrified to make a change because of the financial state of the country at the moment. So it's, and I don't want this to be doom and gloom on the country, or, but it's just the reality that we currently find ourselves in. So love to anyone else out there going through it. We feel you on that. So
Yeah,
we're
I think
coming.
it was like something like 87%
Yeah,
of people
what
said that they felt
is
stressed about money. And I was just like, wow, that's a lot of us.
it's mental. It really is. And also, I don't know, when I saw it, I guess it gave me a feeling of solidarity that, when you're going down to the corner shop to buy something, and, although we may not be connected in terms of having a chat with that person, everyone's going through it. Everyone's got their own things on their mind, that they're trying to deal with each day. And a lot of that, 87% of that on your story, is probably partly due to financial stress. So, yeah. So we're getting to the end of the show now, and obviously you've got your incredible new book out in September. So where exactly can they buy it? I'm going to put the link anyway, but if you just let us know, that would be awesome.
So it's available everywhere. It's available on Amazon, wherever you are, WH Smith, Waterstones, Barnes and Nobles, Audible, Kindle, Kobo. I
Great.
can't
I
think where
mean,
else, but everywhere. And from the 28th of September. But if you pre-order, you might get it a little bit early.
awesome.
And I'm also hoping to kind of run some competitions for the people that have pre-ordered as well. So yeah, please do pre-order. It always helps a new author when there's pre-orders, and it's a nice treat for you to get early as well.
Absolutely. So to finish on, would you mind sharing us a sneak peek of your book, just a little excerpt that you can read out for all of us listeners today?
I would love to. Do you want to heal from your past and learn how to cope with the challenges of your present? Then it's time for some real talk. Taking therapy out of the therapy room and into the real world, psychotherapist and creator of Real Talk Therapist, Tasha Bailey, connects psychological theory and lived experience with creative exercises and prompts to show a more modern and inclusive perspective on mental health. Drawing on her years of experience and case studies from her work, she unlocks topics such as trauma and inner child healing, how to stop people pleasing, love, trust and attachment, challenging your inner critic, self-love, body image and sex. And if you're feeling stuck, Real Talk will help you take the first steps towards growth and healing. Straight talking yet compassionate, Tasha helps to make sense of your past, to understand your present, cope in the hard times, and start your journey to loving yourself the way you always deserved.
Incredible. I am so excited that we've had you on the show today. I feel so lucky that you've spent, your Saturday speaking with us today. So thank you so, so much, Tasha. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.
Well, yeah, have a lovely afternoon, and thanks so much from myself and the Moody Girl listeners. Bye.